So one of the sexiest things within information security or cybersecurity, and definitely in the CISSP, is penetration testing. You talk to anybody that's in high school or college, or that's young in their career. Usually they'll say, "Oh yeah, I want to be a pen tester. I want to get into pen testing and the like." And usually, what I've found in doing this for a while is it is pretty cool. It's pretty cool to go out and do penetration testing and security assessments. And that's how we make a decent living at it, is going out and offering those assessment services as different things that we offer. Typically, what we do is for a penetration test, we usually will do anywhere from 3 to 4 pen tests per year. We're not the cheapest solution out there for doing pen tests, but we are one of the best. So you get what you pay for. And one thing that I like to say is that when we're going in and doing these tests, that you can't just pull somebody off the street and then have them go in and be a cyber ninja. A lot of times with penetration tests, it's not going to work. The things that you do are not going to work the first 10 or 15 or 20 times that you try it. And because of that, a lot of young folks out there get discouraged on the immediacy or the, hey, give it to me now result. And that's quite unfortunate, but it's okay, because then they get turned off to the profession, and it keeps the dream alive for the rest of us. So in this domain, what we typically will see is things like what is a vulnerability assessment, or what is a vulnerability test? How does that differentiate from a pen test? Things like how do we go in and do a compliance audit, or maybe if you're trying to see if a system behaves a certain way, can we generate different types of synthetic tests or automated tests to get systems to behave in a favorable or unfavorable way, and record the screenshots or the reactions of that system. In addition to that, we want to go in and also do things like interface testing, and how is the data being backed up in those regards. What happens if you get a denial of service attack? Have you been prepared for that? When's the last time that you had an assessment? Has it been a long time? And because of that, many different techniques are discussed, and we're going to go through and provide you a little bit of that here today. And I say that because we mentioned it in the last domain, that we want to definitely trust but verify what's going on. I've been on a number of different assessments before, and primarily what I'm talking about in the next statement is as a liaison for a government entity, going in and doing an assessment, and that trust but verify really reigns supreme, because a lot of times when I go in and do an assessment, or the team that I'm on goes in and does the assessment, at the surface, the people that we're meeting with, that the system owner, the project leads, the technical lead, whoever we're meeting with, knows we're coming, and they've known that we're coming for 6 to 8 weeks. So they've had 6 to 8 weeks of prep time to basically try to figure out what we're going to do when we get there. And it's always amazing to me that when we go in and do these types of security assessments, that the attention is not paid to detail for simple things, simple artifacts. And a lot of times what we find is that people will try to pull the wool over an auditor's eye or an assessor's eye, in that they will have templates that really haven't even been filled out, or have just basic implementation strategies that it looks like they copied and pasted from somewhere. And we see that all the time. So the book mentions that we can go out and get the best people, we can get policies and procedures, we can have world-class technology, but if we don't go in and regularly test all of that stuff, then we're not going to be secure for long. And because of that, this chapter jumps into a lot of the important elements of security assessments and testing. So anytime that we're going in and doing an assessment, for me, I use an assessment or a security controls assessment or a compliance assessment as synonymous as the word audit. And really being able to go in and call BS, or if you're trying to be compliant with a specific framework, in my experience, what we'll go in and do is we will see, in fact, what you are compliant with and what you're not compliant with. And then based off of that, we'll ask for more information. If no information is provided, then we have a gap assessment or a gap analysis, and we can probably deduce with a high probability whether or not they are compliant or non-compliant with the framework that's being implemented. And making sure that we go into an assessment with the designing to the engaging with a customer, having clear set goals are super important, and being able to make sure that the audit goes well, and that not only the audit goes well, but we can make sure that the customer is satisfied. We talked about the certification and the accreditation, and for us to be able to go in and have those clear sets of goals and requirements for the test really comes in handy, especially when you're looking to get paid. Because if you can go back and crosswalk the different tests and the different reports that you've made to the scope of work that you went in and did, then you can get paid. And that's really what it's about. So typically what we'll go in and do when we're designing and trying to figure out what those test strategies that we're going to be using are, we'll go in and see what exactly are they looking for us to do. And in some cases, they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what we know. So how do we know what they know if they don't know? And one of the things that we need to do is we need to define a scope. So we need to immediately figure out what subnets or what networks are available. What are the artifacts are we going to look at? What are the privacy concerns? What are the different processes that we're looking to evaluate? And the scope is directly proportional to the amount of time and thus the amount of money that it costs to get the project done. And by that, I say most of the time, what we see is that the design and the validation of the assessment typically up front takes a lot of time. And because of that, I always think about the old proverb, I guess it is, that Abe Lincoln apparently used to say, that if he was given 8 hours to chop down a tree, he would spend 7 hours sharpening the axe and 1 minute chopping it down, and then have 59 minutes to rest. But essentially, same sort of thing here is if we pay attention to the detail up front, if we gather those requirements, if we figure out exactly what the customer's wanting, then we can go in and conduct the assessment. After we begin the assessment, then we start to process the information, and then hopefully put together some sort of report that management can review. And then at that time, we'll go in and have a project meeting that says, here's what the goals are, here's what we were able to do, and hopefully meet everything that we can. So in that regard, the putting the legwork in up front and continually being in contact with the customer, super important. There's a few different types of test strategies that are out there, and one of them is just kind of put into a very vanilla, if you will, term called a security assessment. And that security assessment really is decomposed or broken down further into a pen test, a vulnerability assessment, or a security audit. And usually we need to determine for that customer what's going to be the ROI. Remember, we talked about that, I think, on the first day. And in addition to the ROI, we also talked about, if you recall, the return on security investment, or the ROSI. It's a wonky looking eye. But so we got the return on investment and the return on security investment. So, I'm just giving you numbers here. I'm not saying this is right or wrong or indifferent. If I'm going out and doing an assessment, or my company's going out and doing an assessment, and we're charging you $100,000, and we don't tell you what you're going to get for $100,000, then I don't expect you to pay for it. But if we put in the effort to write a proposal that says that here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, and then here are the artifacts or deliverables that you'll receive as a benefit from this assessment, then typically that is much more received favorably than if you weren't to do that type of put that type of effort into it. And I say that because what we find is that a lot of people use these two words synonymously here: a pen test and a vulnerability assessment. And there is a difference between the two. A vulnerability assessment could be manual or automated, and preferably automated. And it usually will go through and run tools and have some sort of goal that allows you to know what is required from that vulnerability assessment. We want to spend time to make sure that we're testing the correct systems and that people are aware of the priority and the timings that we're going to be testing, to make sure that things that we test, if they break, somebody's there to fix it. Because sometimes when you're doing testing, stuff breaks, and that's just the way that it works. So usually the vulnerability assessment, though, is typically more of a passive type of assessment, whereas the vulnerability assessment might go in and interview certain people, like the personnel. It might actually go in and do physical testing, like see if we can get in to the person's facility without being authorized, but also things like a system or network testing. But the one thing to think of with all of these types of tests is that it is going to be what's referred to as a snapshot in time. And it's a snapshot in time because it's only as good as when it was done. So 6 months down the road, that vulnerability assessment isn't going to be as valid as it was the day that it was done, because your environment is going to be changing the entire time. So a lot of automation, as many automated tools that we can use, we're going to try to with a vulnerability assessment. So that's typically what we do. And because of that, we will go in and try to implement different types of tests to different systems that are out there. I mentioned that a vulnerability assessment is more of a passive test, and the pen test is more of an active test. Usually a pen test will include a vulnerability assessment. So in order for us to know what we can potentially try to penetrate, then we have to be able to know what the vulnerabilities are. So we'll go out and use various automated tools to be able to go out and do that vulnerability assessment. I mentioned the snapshot in time and that it has its limitations. Usually the scanning is done with tools like Nessus or Nexpose, or Rapid7 has some good tools. And those will identify different weaknesses to your network. We can go in and run different types of tools, whether they're OS driven, or if the test is more on a web app, we can run things like Burp Suite or other things like that. Maybe discovery tools to find out what exactly is on the network. A lot of times what we typically will find is with a vulnerability assessment, anything that has been misconfigured will show its ugly head. And that's really, I think, a good return on investment for people that are going in and doing those vulnerability assessments, plus the people that are paying for it. You'll figure out, hey, I need to go in there and fix this particular server, or different things like that. And in the report, we will go in and tell them that based off of what we've seen, here are the common attacks that you could be exposed to. So many different types of vulnerability assessment tools are out there. And there's port scanners, vulnerability scanners, password crackers, even social engineering are all different ways that we can do vulnerability assessments. Whereas a penetration test typically helps bridge the gap between the passive vulnerability assessment, where we're just collecting data and then taking a look at that data and figuring out, okay, we think that it might be susceptible to these certain things, but we're not 100% sure unless we can actually poke through it and see. And that's where the pen test comes in handy here. A lot of the same questions we have are reigning supreme here, including what's going to be tested in specifics with IP addresses. If there's physical locations, we want to know that as well. And we want to provide a customer what's the return on investment. So those are all very, very important things when we're doing a penetration test. And I say that because there's a number of different types of pen tests that are out there. And I will tell you that each vendor that offers them has their own little secret sauce that they'll offer up and may be better than somebody else down the road. But the black box testing, typically you'll hear about that. That means that someone doesn't have any knowledge or any previous knowledge or any documentation or anything about that network. So I'm going in blind into the assessment. That's a black box test. Where a white box test gives the person that's going in and doing the pen test pretty much open kimono, is the way I described it the other day. And you're showing your world to us and providing every bit of documentation, any type of network topology diagrams, configuration components. Whereas a gray box test is kind of where we see most people. Most people don't have enough for a white box test. They don't really know what they don't know on their network. Sometimes they'll have a network topology diagram that they provide you, maybe some configuration settings for different servers. So that's more of a gray box test where you have some information, but certainly not everything. It's no fault of the company that you're doing the test for, because they're paying you as a hired gun or a company to come in there and do it for them and help them out with that. So usually with a pen test, what we try to do is at the best that we can possibly do, we try to simulate attacks. And what does that mean? That means that it needs to be the same methods that the attacker uses. And so, like the certified ethical hacker, we don't teach people how to hack, but we teach people tools, what hackers use in order to be able to perform system compromise or hacking into systems. And by doing that, at least you know how to recognize the tools and some of the fingerprints and footprints of those tools. But essentially, we can use the same methods as the attacker in an attempt to simulate an attack from a bad guy, an adversary, and with the intent that we're trying to compromise systems, so the company can go back and patch them at a later date. We're not trying to get people in trouble. We're just going in there and running a vulnerability assessment, figuring out where the vulnerabilities are, and then basically doing what's called a fuzz test, where we throw everything at it that we possibly can to see what works and what doesn't. And that's what I was telling you when we started off this conversation, that a lot of people get frustrated, and if you get frustrated easily, then this is definitely not a piece of business that you need to be into. A lot of times what we look for are people that not only have a security background, but also people that can script or write code in some way, because usually those people know that given enough time and enough resources, we can do just about anything if we know how to program. So usually pen test will evaluate things like web servers, internal servers, router configurations, workstation vulnerabilities, any sensitive information, VPN access. So those are some of the things that usually we'll see for a pen test. And because of that, we'll give a report at the end to management that describes any of the vulnerabilities that we found and whatever severity those are. Now, I have a friend that works for an entity for the government, and they were telling a story. We play cards. I have a cards group that I play with, and poker that I play with. And this friend was telling me that they were lucky that they had their, if you think about the game Monopoly, the get out of jail free card. They were lucky that they had their get out of jail free card because they were doing an assessment, and when they were doing an assessment, they actually had weapons pulled on them when they were trying to do a physical security test, and they were in an unauthorized area, and at that particular place, they had guns drawn on them because they were in an unauthorized area. And in the pocket, or inside pocket of this vest, he had a letter stating that, in case the mission was compromised and they were figured out, that this is the get out of jail free card. Now your cover is blown at that point if you're trying to do a more less known type of attack, or an unannounced type of attack. Then You might be susceptible to, especially if it's a physical assessment, you might get in some trouble. So keep that in mind if you're ever going to get into this. So it can be a great opportunity for people to learn, and if you've never done one before, then know that there's companies out there that specialize in this, and that the opportunities are there if you ever wanted to try to get into that. So as we continue to look here at some of the different techniques, one of the naive approaches I think that a lot of people make from the outside looking into our profession is that these things magically just happen. If we're going to do a pen test, we just kind of go right into it, and we're going to try to overwhelm people. When in fact, there is a method to the madness. There is a method to the madness. And what we try to do is we try to passively gather as much information through a process called discovery. And the process of discovery can take a very long time depending on what you're trying to do. So the different phases of a penetration test would be discovery, enumeration of nodes on the network. You go in and see if you can do a vulnerability assessment, and then we see if we can exploit those vulnerabilities. And then after we've exploited them, we've taken screenshots and the like, then we will provide a report to management with our findings. And based off of that, we can kind of put them into a pre-attack phase, an attack phase, and a post-attack phase. So those are typically what you see when people talk about going into a penetration test and being able to execute that test accordingly.